afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on basic sociology, in today's lecture, I am going to discuss on a form of social inequality that has been part of study of industrial society, and this is unequal opportunity structure and labor market segmentation. So much of the conventional or traditional understanding of social inequality was kind of restricted to the realm of caste, class, gender. Now, when we are kind of witnessing a large scale transformation in the industrial urban society, it is important to understand the nature of labor market segmentation. And for this purpose, we are going to refer to the article by Krekel on unequal opportunity structure and labor market segmentation. So, to begin with, we know that when we need to understand social inequality, the most common term that is being used by sociologists is social stratification. Now, sociology as a discipline is the study of social stratification, and if we were to study inequality in the labor market, the concept of stratification was applied. However, if the economists were interested in studying the labor market inequality, they would look into the theories of market or neoliberal classical theories. Now, the two, sociology of social stratification and labor market economics, have kind of developed in isolation from one another. So, the metaphor of hierarchically superposed social strata and the neoclassical market model of the free interplay of supply and demand are regarded as incompatible. Now, what do we mean by the metaphor of hierarchically superposed social strata? This implies that there is a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is a vertical putting of one strata over the other. So, the most top layer are at a superior position compared to the most lowest position. So, superposed social strata means they are situated on top of each other. Now, this is the understanding of a sociologist. Now, if we move to the economy, they are applying the neoclassical market model. Now, what is the neoclassical market model? This is based on market as an equalizer. So, the whosoever or all social actors in the market are kind of regulated by the demand and supply, and therefore it is kind of assumed that the structure of the labor market can be understood as an interplay of the supply demand. So, the two kind of were not at all looking at each other, and they were studying the same phenomena, that is the labor market segmentation, but from a different perspective. So, the reason for the incompatibility was the assumption that stratification is based on inequality, whereas the classical model of market focuses on free interplay of supply and demand. So, stratification and social inequality was considered as synonymous, whereas when we move to the neoclassical economic model, there the market is a free place, there is no inequality, nobody is restricted from being a part of the market. So, there is a kind of an egalitarian relation and an open space for exchange of goods and services, and that is why while one was trying to make sense of inequality, the other was kind of focusing on the level of egalitarian social structure, and the two were kind of considered as opposed to each other. The issue, as for instance unemployment, immigrant labor, or the special role of women in the labor force were neglected. So, they were kind of not understood by the sociologist, or nor were they studied by the economist, and therefore, the requirement or the necessity of having an integrated approach which would look at the vertical superposed layer as well as look into the interchange or exchanges of the market, and the market was not kind of an homogeneous space, and it is not an egalitarian place. They are layers of inequality. Now, this understanding of these inequality is important because many a time social inequality is not to be understood with reference to the strata which is vertical, but it can be at the level of horizontal as well, and that is what we need to understand. How do we understand labor market segmentation without kind of making the assumption that stratification is synonymous to inequality. So, this state of mutual isolation that is between the sociology of social stratification and the neoliberal market economy has almost come to an end, because there are new ways in which we need to understand the urban industrial society, and therefore, there is a kind of a reapproachment. And this reapproachment has enabled us to overcome the limitation of both the discipline, that is, to understand the limitation within social stratification as well as understand the limitation within the neoliberal market analysis. Now, when we look into the understanding of how traditional sociologists were studying social stratification, we said that a stratified society was a society which was arranged in a hierarchy. For example, the caste was a stratified society. But now, a stratified society is no longer a key sociological concept, as its theoretical limitations have become increasingly noticeable. In recent year, there has been a rediscovery of a new Max Weber, and his classical distinction of class, status and party is now not the conceptual centerpiece of stratification theory. So, earlier if as students we had to read something on stratification, the most classical text was Weber, Class, Status and Party, and that was based on a kind of a stratified society, a hierarchically arranged strata. But now that we have the complexity of social structure, this class, status, party is no longer relevant, and the effort is to kind of explore a new concept that will help us to understand the concept of social inequality and labor market segmentation more clearly. So, Weber's idea that class situation ultimately are to be considered as market situation is re-emphasized. So, the whole idea that class and market situation are dependent on each other, and therefore, the concept that has become relevant in understanding structured social inequality is social closure. Now, the term social closure was used by Weber in understanding inequality, but the focus was somehow taken by the other sociologists on class, status and party, and social closure kind of remained a unnoticed concept. Now, this concept has been used to understand labor market segmentation. So, the question is, what does it mean that the phrase social closure is a sociological term that describes how groups establish and maintain boundaries to restrict access to resources, opportunities and social status. Social closure can occur in many forms, such as ownership of the means of production. As in Marxist theory, the bourgeois can practice social closure over the proletariat by owning the means of production. So, social closure is basically a kind of a community or a group which is constructed by a number of people in terms of access to certain resources. Now, only this group which is within the boundary have access, and that is why the resources are then closed for those outside that group. So, owners, capitalists are kind of having the social closure of capital, whereas the proletariat do not have access. The second example of social closure is institutional racism. So, in South Africa during apartheid, the white race practiced social closure against black race through institutional and ideological racism. A third example could be patriarchy, where the men practice the social closure in terms of excluding women access to certain entitlement. Now, we have understood what is the concept of social closure. Next, let us use this concept to understand structured social inequality. So, in the post-war period, Western sociology of social inequality, Warner was accepted rather than Marx. So Warner's theory of social inequality became more applicable in the post-war period than Karl Marx's opposite antagonism. So Marx's theory, if we were to revise, was a conflict between the capitalist and the group that did not have any ownership of property. So basically, it was the conflict between the bourgeois and the proletariat. Now, this model of class antagonism has been rejected in favor of model of hierarchically superposed strata. Now, this hierarchically superposed strata implies that there are several groups that are arranged vertically. They are arranged on top of each other, and thereby, the term social stratification and social inequality became virtually synonymous. Inequality was stratification. One of the first issue and explicit warning against this equation was Dennis H. Wrong. So, for Dennis H. Wrong, it would be incorrect to consider stratification and inequality as synonym, because stratification only refers to the vertical inequality, whereas in social inequality is kind of more than just vertical inequality. Now, Dennis H. Wrong, in an article titled Social Inequality Without Stratification, emphasized that social inequality was conceivable without the existence of any system of stratification. So, that is to say that stratification and inequality, they are kind of completely two different things. So, there is a possibility that stratification is present, yet the society is egalitarian. On the other hand, there could be inequality and stratification is not present. So, that the connection between stratification and inequality has been established. So, in order to allow theoretically for the empirical possibility of an unequal yet unstratified society, a strict conceptual distinction between inequality and stratification was necessary, inequality being the more generic term. Wrong's central argument is that social stratification is not the only conceivable form of social inequality. There are multiple alternatives possible, and we need, as sociologists, need to look for these alternatives. Let us not only understand inequality by making sense of stratification, let us kind of explore a society where structured social inequality is practiced and there is no presence of stratification. And that is the reason that we need to kind of explore or understand vertical mobility research and the relationship, how vertical mobility research were kind of assuming that strata or classes was the real social group, or collectivities was abandoned in favor of purely nominal definition. And what is the nominal definition? The definition is of strata. Strata were defined by means of horizontal dividing line, which made more or less arbitrary cuts straight across the societal or occupational structure. This meant that the groups of people with sociologically completely heterogeneous characteristic could be thrown together in one stratum, whereas socially homogeneous collectivity might be artificially split up between two or more strata. Many sociologists are reluctant to break from the conceptual coherence of mobility and stratification. The assumption that vertical mobility is logically dependent on the broader conception of society as a stratified hierarchy with distinct grades or steps that mobile person travel upward and below is likely one of the main cause of this reluctance. So, there is a close connection between vertical mobility research and the idea of stratification. So, stratification implies that there is a vertical layer or vertical arrangement of strata, and it is assumed that if they are stratas which are ranked according to the status, according to resources available, then it is inherent that groups which are at a lower strata will make an effort to move up. So, the entire theory of upward mobility and downward mobility is based on understanding inequality from a vertical mobility research point. So, the author here expands the conceptual field of vertical mobility so as to relate it to all forms of structured inequality rather than to stratification alone. So, two reasons, and we know that we have heard of a quote by Rousseau saying, all men are born equal. Now, this phrase is no longer kind of meaningful or does not hold true, and the author gives us two main reasons for this. Number one, men do not always treat other as equal, even if they are standing on the same position. Say for instance, if we bring in Karl Marx theory, even if they are two owners of capital, they will not treat each other as equal. The effort would be to kind of make some competition somewhere where one would get more than the other and therefore will raise up in the vertical strata. So, the conditions of life and success tends to be allocated unequally, and this becomes an issue requiring sociological investigation and explanation. The unequal treatment of man by man refers to the relational aspect of structured social inequality, especially to the dimension of power. So, they can be two kind of having the same kind of resources. What will be the criteria for differentiation, or what would be the factor for inequality? Would be access to power. If one has more access to the power, then their position status kind will be changed, and that is relational. It's not that the one who has power is completely on the top. In relation to someone else, his or her position will become subordinate. The other aspect of structured social inequality is the distributive aspect. The unequal allocation of material and symbolic conditions of life and success refers to the distributive aspect of structured social inequality. The distributive aspect of structured social inequality refers to the unequal distribution of possibilities of access to certain material and symbolic conditions or to social goods. Now, social goods may be either material, which is less, that is scarce, farmland, food, capital, they are in scarcity. Only few can have access to it. It can't be distributed equally. And it could also include socio-culturally sacrificed. So, some of the resources, in order to be equally distributed, has to be sacrificed. And what are these? These are non-material goods. This could be rights, skills. But before we kind of understand the distribution of the social goods, let us make an effort to understand what are social goods. Social goods are human products of past human action which have become the conditions of social action in the present. So, these are all kind of material and non-material good which in the past human beings through the interaction have created, and these creation are now becoming the basic of survival. So, as human life started, there was no technology, but with now surviving without technology is kind of impossible. So, technology becomes a social good. If these man-made and scarce or sacrificed social goods have become sufficiently permanent conditions of social life, and if access to or exclusion from affects the life chances of member of a society in an asymmetrical way, then we are faced with distributive social inequality, or to use a more convenient term, with an unequal opportunity structure. So, the social goods are scarce or it has to be sacrificed by somebody, but yet they are necessity for survival of human being. Now, what will decide who will have the access to social good and who will not? Now, much of what we see in the industrial urban society is that access to these depends on how much of opportunity an individual had in his or her life to get access to that. So, this opportunity could be in terms of education, in terms of your cultural capital, in terms of your context in which you are growing up. So, these conditions or opportunity then decides the occupational structure. So, if you have access to quality education, you will be able to improve your educational status and thereby improve your employment in it. So, these unequal opportunity structure then becomes a more significant term to understand labor market segmentation. Now, how do we understand the relation between vertical mobility and social good? So, if the sociology of vertical mobility is related to social goods, then stratification will not examine moving in and out of a strata, but we would investigate the interplay between structural conditions of social success or failure and actors' response to these conditions. According to Frank Parkin, the backbone of the class structure and the entire reward system of modern Western society is the occupational order. Thus, the key concept for understanding social inequality in modern society is the occupational opportunity structure. In advanced capitalist society are employed on the basis of wage labor. Their life chances as well as those of the dependent are determined to a very large extent by their position in the occupational opportunity structure. The sociological analysis of labor market conditions therefore appears to be a crucial concept for understanding the opportunity structure in Western society. And that is why we have kind of understood that the traditional concept of stratification is limited in its attempt to understand inequality in the labor market. Now, this insight has been largely neglected by the traditional stratification research. Both Marx and Weber knew that in a capitalist society, the selling of one's labor power in the labor market is the only source of income for all those who have to earn a living without having control over their means of production. However, neither of them thought that the market chance were equal for all participants in the labor market. And one name which becomes important to understand the concept of opportunity structure is Anthony Giddens. He used the sociological concept of market to understand relational aspect of structural social inequality, that is power, and brought back the concept for power in understanding the labor market segmentation in capitalist society. So, without reference to the unequal bargaining strength of those who participate. Now, bargaining will depend on how much of power you have in the opportunity structure. Consequently, the social source of this unequal market power will have to be identified. So, this is how we understand the shifts taking place in the understanding of labor market segmentation from moving from stratification, vertical mobility to understanding social closures, social groups, and most significant to understand the bargaining power, the life chances and opportunity that individual gets in order to enter the market, and that kind of helps us to understand the structured social inequality and labor market segmentation. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.